Okay, so again, what we're going to do is go through the process of creating the contours as they spread away from this platform, as well as filtering out which contours out of this existing landform that they intersect with. So in this part of the script, this is how we start to first just separate which of the existing contours are below the platform, this um, cyan looking rectangle, versus which of these contours are above it. This kind of helps. You can see that the high point of the platform is below 13 feet and that this point is above 12 feet. So it's nestled right in between those whole number contours. And basically what this part is doing is saying, okay, tell me which contours are, again, below it versus which ones are above it. We first do that by taking the point from our deconstructed plane that gives us an origin point. We deconstruct that point to find the z value, which it doesn't matter if it's the high one or the low one, as long as it's in between, we're okay. We use this part of the script to figure out, okay, let's look at all the existing contour points, see where those z values are, and see which ones are higher or lower than that one. And this is what the dispatch component does. So let's turn both of these on. So you can see when I look out, let's go ahead and turn this off. So here's the contours that are below our platform. And here's the contours that are above our platform. If we go into the axon view, you can see that as well versus these ones. Okay, so I'll risk it and just go ahead and delete all of this. See if my memory works well. That way we can all join the struggle together. Okay. So from this part of our contour, we've kind of made that new grading around the platform, and this is where we have to start tapering it or offsetting it in that direction. So I'll go ahead and let's just delete this part as well. Yeah, so I'll just keep it there so I don't have to reconnect it to that. But so the first thing we need to do is offset it. So I'll double type here or double click, offset, and just use this one, not the loose one. The curve that we're offsetting is this one, so we'll plug that in. This one is going a distance of 1. That's not exactly what that value needs to be. We need this to go out every 3 feet away from that existing one. So this is where we use a series component. So I'm going to use series. It needs to start at a value. It's fine keeping this at 0. A step size, which needs to be 3. So I'll just drag this one up to here. It's essentially just a yellow tab because that value shouldn't ever change. The count, I always do fairly large increments just to make sure we intersect everything. This is just going to offset them a large amount. So distance, so we'll say, so this is what gives us to offset in all of those intervals of 3. Plane, XY, that's fine. And everything else should be okay here. For whatever reason, this creates separate branches of data. I'm just going to go ahead and flatten it so they're all in the same part. And so essentially what we need to do now is project all these contours. So imagine this is the next contour above this platform. We need to actually project that to that contour above it. Right now, they're all just sitting perfectly horizontal. You can start to see these contours are actually slightly above it. So that's what we need to do now. So we're going to project So we're going to project them onto a plane. We need to make sure, we need to essentially project them on the same plane as those existing contours. So this is where we do that flooring component. So we have that Z value. We need to figure out where all those contours are above it. So rounding 12.92 up is going to give us 13. And then we just interpolate those contour heights from there. So I'm going to go to math, script, expression. I'm going to remove that one. Change this to ceiling, X, hit OK. I'm going to plug this value into there. And you can see that that value, which was 12.92, gets rounded up to 13 because that's the next contour above our platform, which is what we want. So let's go ahead and drag this down here. And so what we're doing is just kind of interpolating that data to say, okay, we know it needs to project up to the 13-foot contour line, the 14, the 15, and so on. So what we can do, I mean, this is one way. Yeah, let's keep it this simple. So we're going to create a series as well, where now it's going to start at this value. So it's going to start at 13. It's going to move up every one increment. And you can just use the same number slider. So I'm going to do also 20. I'm going to plug that into there. Oops, that's not a point. Let's actually create a point first. So undo that. So we're going to go to vector, construct point, plug this into our Z values. So they start at 13 and move their way up. Now plug that into there. So now it's doing this kind of inverted looking pyramid. And this is where we start to figure out, okay, where do these proposed contours away from our platform intersect with the existing contours? That's the whole logic behind this process. So the first thing we need to do is find out which ones are intersecting with which. So I'm going to go ahead and go to sets, tree, merge. So we're just merging the data, essentially merging our existing contours and our proposed contours. Those ones are up here after this dispatch component. So I'll plug that into there, and I'll plug this one into here. Because again, these are going to have different tree branches. You can see one has one branch, the other one has two, based off of those zeros right here. So I'm just going to go ahead and flatten so they're all in the same pool of data. So once you do that, let's go ahead and just let's turn this one off at least. Just incrementally turn these off. So now we have to figure out which out of all of these existing contours. So you can see that there's all of these contours that are above our platform. We're really only interested in knowing which ones are directly intersecting with our platform so that we can filter out these ones that are over here and over here, because we really don't need to have to worry about those ones, most likely. So the first thing we're going to do is go to intersect, physical, multiple curves. So I'll blend those, and you can see that it creates two intersection points. That looks about right. That's pretty much where the only contours that it's going to intersect with. Sometimes you might have more, sometimes you might have less. This just happens to have one existing contour that it's intersecting with. So what this does is it gives us another kind of way to sort out the information, to filter out, okay, just tell us which contours it's intersecting with. And that's what this index value is, because index A is this first data, which is the existing contours. So you can see that gives us this index value of 1, 1. We really just need one of those values. So we'll go to sets, delete consecutive to give us that value. And now we can use that index to pull out specifically these contours. So we're looking at, in this case, in mine, I have 24 contours that I could potentially intersect with. I'm only intersecting with one, and I need to know which contour that actually is. So if I stay within the Sets tab, go to List Item, the list of data I'm looking at is these contours. So I'm going to plug this into there. And now it's asking for an index. It defaults to 0, but this is what this one is. You can see here's that lowercase I for index. It's looking for that index, so that's what we use this to get rid of that duplicate. And now what's great about this is now you can see that it's gone from looking at all of these contours to only looking at the ones that it's intersecting with. So this is going to help tell you which contours are actually being intersected with and isolating them. So now we have our one contour and we have our projected or proposed contours. Now we have to just intersect those ones together. So now I'm going to go back to intersect, go to physical, and do curve and curve this time, because we're really only dealing with these two different sets. So we have A, which we're just going to stay as the proposed, or the existing contour, sorry. We plugged that was the same one as here. And now we're going to do the same thing with here. It's going to again give us our points. You can turn that one off now. So this gives us our parameters to intersect with. So this is what we're going to use to actually shatter these two intersecting curves so we can actually remove the excess. So you can kind of see or imagine that this existing contour, it's going to intersect with this proposed. It's going to shift over, move down, and then it's going to reconnect with that existing contour, removing this part of it. Does that whole kind of operation make sense? You're removing that one, you're remanipulating it to fulfill that 3-to-1 ratio, essentially. So you can see that there's the parameters for that A curve, which is your existing, versus the parameter of your B curve, which is your proposed. I mean, to make life simple, you might want to even just rename these. So you can say T existing. That's going to be T proposed. That way you can say this is, that one's the existing one, that's the proposed. So now you go to curve, utility or division, shatter. So we're going to shatter those curves at those points. So here's the first one. So the existing one. So you could just say existing. We also want to graph this, just because we have a dashed line and a solid line that usually tells you need to resort that data. And now I'm going to do the same thing with the other curve. So I'm going to use the T proposed output for this T. And instead of the same item, we're going to use this one. So those proposed contours. And now we have that data figured out. So this essentially did shatter them, but we need to actually just isolate the different components. So let's go ahead and cull some of that data or list them. So I can go to sets, list item, This is going to tell us, or in this case, we do want to cull this existing one. So we want to remove this middle piece. So we cull it or remove it. Cull index, so go to sequence, cull index. And then it's going to be either 0 or 1 since there's only 2 items. If I select that, let's turn off these components. And now you can see that only these ones are highlighted on the outside of this contours. We can even turn these off as well. So now you can see there's that versus that one. And we'll do the same thing for down here. So for that other item. So we'll turn, I think I have it turned on all the way over here. So now they should be the same value. And now you can see that they're nicely trimmed away. The last thing you need to remember to do is also kind of cull this contour away from all of these contours. So, and again, use sequence, cull index, may use the ones that are above our platform, so these ones. And essentially what you're saying is ignore this one that we just trimmed or manipulated. So we're gonna look at all those contours, and we're gonna use the same logic where we use the index out of here to cull it. So now you can see that we're no longer looking at that one that we've manipulated. This just helps with merging all your data together. So with these two parts, we can see that there's still individual segments, so we need to join those. So we'll go to Curve, Utility, Join Curves. Now we'll just plug these in together. And don't worry if it's orange, it's just because there's data that never intersected. So if it's orange, that's okay, as long as there's still something left over. So there you go. Now you have your new manipulated contour, as well as all those other contours above it. And so that's the same logic that we used for the cut versus the fill that are above. So this is really the script that you're going to use for both of them. The only thing that you're really changing is that in this case, when you had to floor it, that you actually, the step size for this one is -1. So this series that the floor plugs into, it's fine that the ceiling plugs into this series and it's positive because they're going up. But this one, it needs those contours to go in the downward direction. So that's why make sure when you plug this floor into this one, that the step is going into -1 value. So that's really the only thing out of this entire operation that really is going to change. And so I've done it for those ones already. Now we can start to merge all that data together. I guess the last part is you want to also kind of figure out there's some null items. That's why it's orange. So we can go to sets, sequence, or list, sorry, null item. Use the dispatch pattern to figure out which ones actually are or not. Plug this value into here. And from that, we're going to have their curve component. So it should still be this one. That's, again, just to kind of get rid of all those items that aren't intersecting that makes this one orange. So one last thing is we need to, what did I use this one for? It should be fine, actually. So mhm. Okay. So here's these instances. So now we just have to merge all these contours that we've manipulated together. So what we're going to do is, so this one goes all the way back to here, right? Okay. So I'll show you this. So you should all have this point, and this is where you need to just merge all that data together. So we're going to go to Sets, List, Replace Item. So we're replacing these manipulated ones with the existing ones that we had at the very beginning. So I'm going to drag this. So this is where you contoured your surface at the very beginning. So I'm going to drag this over to here. The items that we're replacing it with are these new contours. So we're going to just run this twice. So flatten this one. And we're using the same index from over here where we had to delete the consecutive ones from this multiple curves intersection. So I'll drag that one now into here. So there's all those parts. And now we just need to do the same thing. So we'll just use the same. So replace items. Now we're just doing the same thing with this one. Can turn that one off. Now we want to add this new one that we just manipulated into here. We'll flatten that. And now we need to use that same index item, which again is that delete consecutive component from this index item. Slowly scroll over. Now we can turn this off. And voila, now we have all our contours merged back together so beautifully. So I don't know why that's still including that one. Huh, that's odd. I'm not gonna worry about it. All right, so, yeah, that's fine. Okay, so now you have no, that's wrong. So we have these ones that we're essentially gonna merge with all the other ones. So an easier way is to actually use the merge component. So you type merge. So you have your cold items from the previous one. You have these curves from that one. We can flatten that. Include these ones, flatten those. And also, let's go back to col index. So we're looking at these. We're using that same index item. Turn that off and drag this also to here. So there you go. So now here's all those contours. So, okay, finally to this phase of the assignment. So you have all your contours. Now we have to create that intricate network of line segments for your shortest path. So we're going to take these contours, and like I said, we're going to divide them into points that are roughly 33 feet away. So I'll go to curve, division, divide distance, and divide them all by 33 feet. We can flatten this as well. So now you can see that now there have these points along each contour that are roughly 33 feet or give you roughly that 3% slope. So from here, we're going to also flatten these points. Flatten. I'm going to go over to mesh, triangulation, and Delaunay edges. Plug that into here, and that's what gives you that cool little network of curves. Essentially what it's doing is just finding a series of points that are relatively close to that one and creating that network. That's how the trail or that pathway is going to work for your shortest walk. So the first thing to do now is to essentially determine which of these curves in this network are too steep or a good slope percentage. So this, we're going to use that same kind of mathematical process of determining the slope percentage of each one of these curves. So we can turn this off. So we see that we have, out of this E value, all these edges. So we're going to use that slope calculation. So we need to figure out the elevation change between the start point and the end point of all these segments. So I'm going to go to curve, endpoints, drag that into there. And so this is going to tell us where the high point is and the low point is of each one of these segments. We need to deconstruct them to find their Z values. So I'm going to go to vector, point, deconstruct. So here we have our Z values for the start point and the end point. And just to write this down, so what this is essentially doing is looking at, let's just say we take one of those line segments. It's looking at the start point and the end point, and it's giving us our Z values. So Z1 is for the start point, and the Z2 is this Z point. So something to keep in mind. So in order to find out the slope of a curve, we have to do what? How do you formulate the slope?
You need the distance of elevation
divided by
the length.
Length. So rise over run, right? So this is where it's a little tricky. So if it's going in a positive direction, if that slope is going up, most likely let's just give it an arbitrary value and say this is at 1 and this is at 3 in terms of its elevation change. If I subtract, so if I do, because you have to find the distance and elevation, right? So if I do 1 minus 3, that's going to give me what? -2. So -2. So this is where it gets a little bit weird, because the way you sort this out, you actually want to look at those as positive values. So we have to add a little, or we have to kind of add to this equation. So I'm still going to follow through and do math. So we're going to subtract this value, because it's okay if it's going. So the inverse of that is if it's sloping down. So it's now 3, 1, 3 minus 2 equals 1. So it's okay if this gets converted to a negative value, because as long as it's going downhill, we know it's not exceeding a 3% slope, right? So it doesn't really matter if these negative values convert to, or these positive values get converted to negative, because it's still going to read in the data as less than 3% slope, right? Does that make sense? Somewhat? Like, the way we have to sort this out is saying, like, okay, if that slope percent is below 3, or if it's above 3%, it's not adequate, right? Like, the max slope that we can have for a pathway is 3%. So it could be as negative as possible, right? It could be negative 90% or whatever. It's still less than 3% slope, right? So that's what it's saying, is that it doesn't matter if it's in the negative direction or what degree it is in the negative direction, they're all going to be less than 3% slope. That's really just how this math operation is going to work, but it does matter if that positive slope does go above in actuality. So I know it's a little confusing, but I promise the logic is there. So this is going to give us all our negative values. And like I said, we want these to actually read as positive slope because the slope is in the positive direction. So we're going to just take those values, go to operation and use the negative, or convert those to positive that are negative and positive to negative. So that gives us now our elevation change. That's just the one part of the slope percentage. We have to actually divide that by the length. So now we can just use curve analysis, length, pull out of here. So this gives us our run value. So rise over run. So now we go to math, divide, A over B. Now we need to multiply that by 100 to actually convert it to a slope percentage. And here's something that's kind of cool. Like you can see, just for determining the slope percentage of these segments, it's requires a bit of components to figure that out. So something that's cool, if you ever like get or fall in love with Grasshopper scripts, you can start to create your own custom scripts. So what I could do, because I know I'm going to use this later, I'm going to select all those, hit spacebar, and you'll see there's this box over here to join them all together. Oops, I don't know. I think I have to have this go into something else. So just keep that for now. So now what this does, it took all those components. If you hover over, you can kind of see what that looks like. So you could say, here's DE. This is length for your slope percentage. And this gives you S. You can just rename this slope percent. So now it took looks like about 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 components and converted them into one, which kind of helps with cleaning it up. So we have our slope percentages of all these network of curves, and this is where we need to filter them out. So anything that goes above 3%, if I remember, I think it's actually impossible to even have that work. So we might have to raise that slope percentage to 5, I think. So now we're going to compare all these percent slopes with 3% or 5 most likely. So I'm going to go to sets or go to math, operations, and do smaller than. So find all these slopes that are smaller than or equal to, we'll do 3 less than 5. So right now it's set to find all those curves that are less than 3%, less than or equal to. I go to sets, dispatch. So I'm looking at all these segments, so that goes into this value, and I'm using this pattern of less than or equal to. Go ahead and turn off all of these. Now look at what in fact is true or not. So now that curves have been filtered down all the way to these remaining curves that are within that 3% slope range. So pretty much all these ones over here are above 3%. You can kind of see, yeah, those look like they're pretty steep in most cases. So now we can finally use that shortest walk component. So what you want to do is create a point that's close to your platform and a point that's near the edge. So we're going to reference both of those points. So make those points in Rhino. Select this point. We're going to make sure that we actually project those onto our surface. So make sure they're below just to make life easy. So I'm going to project these points. The direction, we want to go in a positive z value. And then it's asking for geometry. What's nice, just like how we created these curves from all those points on our surface, we can also create a very detailed mesh using the Delaney mesh. So this will actually even now incorporate the slope from our swale. And this makes a pretty nice detailed mesh just using points, which is cool. So we're gonna project those points onto our mesh over here. You can see that now they're projected. From these, we create a curve. So I'm gonna go curve, polyline. So now I have a point, essentially a line that's just connecting from one to the other. This is what we use the shortest walk for. So now let's turn this one off, and I promise we're almost there. We might just get away from the visualization aspect of it. So we have, you're essentially saying I need to get from point A to point B, use this network of curves that are within that 3% slope range to get me there, the fastest way. I mean, it doesn't always have to be the fastest, but for this, that's how it works. When you download this from the World Wide Web, you're going to take that component and you can just drag it onto your canvas, or you can go to File, Special Folders, Component Folder, and in here you'll see there's the shortest walk component. So that's how you install these plugins into Grasshopper. You'll see in the Curve tab here, there's the icon, so Utility, Shortest Walk. So the first thing that it's asking for is that curve group, or this network of curves. That's these ones. You don't have to input anything for length, but the next thing you need to know is that wanted path. So that's this path that we just created from point A to point B. Turn gray, so that means it worked. We can turn this off. And voila, there's your shortest path that it's going to take to get there. I don't exactly like that, so you can always kind of create, like move one around to see if it shifts it. If I want to move it all the way up over here, it really likes that edge. So it gets a little bit gnarly in some cases. Let's see what happens if we actually increase our slope percentage to 5. Maybe it'll give a more desirable path. So there we go. Oh, really? No, I don't like that section. You can even mess with this curve division value from being 33. At first, I think I just did at 30, which might filter out a little. So there we go. So this really just creates the complexity of your curve network. The reason I want it to be fairly high is if I do something like 10 feet away from each point, for one thing, it might just overwhelm your computer because you're adding just that many. But now, like, these points get really short, and most likely, when they get really short and they're going up still a foot, that means it's just going to get really steep, right? Like shorter distance, greater elevation. It's rare that it's actually going to even find a curved network that's that shallow. Not to say that there isn't, but you'll see if I have them that short, there's still curves that are within that 3%. None of them are actually connecting. You can see once it reaches this ridge, there's no lines that are crossing over. So that's why you don't want to make it too low, but rather you can even do something maybe like 40. Now let's see what it looks like. So there you go. So now you still got these switchbacks. And what's cool, you can see how it actually does go up these contours one after another, and then eventually makes its way across the saddle and the contours and meets our platform. So imagine you could use that compass approach where you just pick a point, swivel around with your compass, find out where it intersects, swivel it over. And this gives you a lot of kind of control over giving quite a variety of outcomes by shifting it around, either revising the complexity of your network or the desired slope. I think next week we'll just get into how you can actually even color code this as well, so we can see like which ones are really shallow or really closer to flat versus ones that are around that 5%. But that should get you to where it is. So yeah, start having fun with that.